When I married my husband, everyone said I was lucky because he was kind, caring, and always treated me like I was his whole world. And for years, our life felt perfect, especially after we had a daughter who became the center of my life. But slowly, things began to change in ways I couldn't explain. He started coming home late, stopped talking to me, kept his phone locked, and smiled at messages he never shared with me. Until one night, I saw my best friend's name on his screen, and a fear settled in my heart that I tried to ignore. But the truth came out weeks later when he looked me straight in the eyes and calmly told me he didn't love me anymore and wanted a divorce, as if our years together meant nothing. And when I asked for my rights, the house, the car, and security for our daughter, his voice turned cold and he said his lawyer would handle everything. And from that moment, everything went downhill. He started treating our daughter badly, ignoring her, yelling at her, making her feel unwanted until she cried and asked me if she had done something wrong. And that was when I realized I wasn't just fighting a divorce, I was fighting for my child. So I hired a lawyer and trusted him completely. But every court hearing I kept losing. My husband looked confident while my lawyer seemed weak and careless, and I couldn't understand why. Until one evening I overheard a phone call that made my blood run cold, because the man I trusted to protect me had already been bought by my husband for $3,000, and at that moment I knew this case was never meant to be fair. After overhearing that phone call, I didn't confront my lawyer immediately because I needed proof, but inside I was completely broken. Everything finally made sense. Why I kept losing, why my evidence was ignored, and why my husband walked into court like he had already won. And when I finally asked my lawyer directly if my husband had paid him, he didn't even deny it. He laughed and told me these cases never end well for women like me. And that sentence hit harder than the cheating itself. So I walked out of his office, fired him on the spot, and for the first time realized how alone I truly was. Days passed as I searched desperately for another lawyer, but every good one asked for fees I couldn't afford, while my husband became even more cruel, openly seeing my friend, blaming me for everything, and treating our daughter like she didn't matter. Until one evening outside my daughter's school, I heard a familiar voice call my name, and when I turned around, I saw my old school class fellow, someone I hadn't seen in years. And when he asked if I was okay, I don't know why, but I told him everything: the betrayal, the cheating, the bought lawyer, and my fear of losing my child. And he listened quietly before saying something I never expected: that he would look at my case himself, not for money, not for favors, but because what was done to me was wrong. And even though I was scared to trust anyone again, that moment felt like the first small light after months of darkness. When my class fellow finally started handling my case, the first thing he told me was that my husband hadn't won because he was innocent or right. He had won because he controlled the system, and that realization alone gave me strength, because for the first time, someone wasn't questioning my character or blaming me for the marriage failing. He carefully reviewed every document, every bank statement, and every detail my previous lawyer had ignored, and then explained how my husband slowly transferred assets, hid income, and created the image of being financially weak. And on the next court date, when we walked in together, I noticed the change immediately. My husband's confident posture stiffened, his smile disappeared, and his lawyer kept whispering in his ear, because they both recognized my class fellow and knew he wouldn't be easy to manipulate. The questions in court became sharper. My husband was forced to answer things he had avoided for months, and for the first time, the judge actually listened to my side. But despite all this progress, the judge announced that more time was needed to review the newly presented information, giving my husband a chance to respond. And while that felt frustrating, my class fellow quietly told me this delay wasn't bad news because it meant the court had finally taken the case seriously. And as we walked out, he warned me that my husband would now try everything, emotional pressure, threats, and manipulation, to break me before the final decision, and I knew then that the hardest part of the fight was still ahead. After that court hearing, my husband completely changed his behavior, as if he realized the ground beneath him was finally shaking. He started calling me late at night, first pretending to care about our daughter, then suddenly turning cold and threatening, saying things like I was ruining his life and that courts always favor men like him. And when fear didn't work, he switched tactics and tried to manipulate me emotionally, reminding me of our early days, the promises we once made, and how divorce would destroy our daughter. But I could see through his lies now, because every word he spoke was only about control, not love. And when that didn't work either, the real pressure began. His family started calling me, blaming me for breaking the home, accusing me of greed for asking for my rights, and even my former best friend, the same woman he cheated with, sent me a message telling me to let go and move on, as if stealing my life wasn't enough for her. And through all of this, my class fellow stayed calm, reminding me that this behavior was proof my husband was scared, because people only attack when they're losing. But the hardest moment came when my husband tried to use my daughter against me, suddenly claiming in court that I was unstable, emotional, and unfit to raise a child alone. And hearing that made my hands shake, because I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted custody not because he loved her, but because it was the final weapon he had left. And for a moment, I felt myself breaking, wondering how someone who once held our daughter in his arms could now use her as a tool. But my class fellow had already prepared for this move. He presented school records, medical reports, and testimonies that showed I was the primary caregiver, the one who attended every meeting, every appointment, every sleepless night. And as these documents were presented, I noticed the judge's expression change, slowly but clearly, because the story my husband had been selling for months was starting to fall apart. Yet even then the case was not over, because my husband had one last trick. He suddenly claimed he had no assets, no savings, no valuable property, painting himself as almost helpless. And for a brief moment, I feared the court might believe him again. But that was when my class fellow revealed something I didn't even know existed: hidden transactions, indirect ownership, and financial trails that linked my husband to properties and accounts he had carefully kept out of my name. And the courtroom went silent as these details were explained. My husband's lawyer tried to interrupt, to object, to delay, but the damage was done, because the mask had finally slipped. And although the judge did not give a final decision that day, he clearly stated that the court would review these new findings carefully. And as we walked out, my husband avoided my eyes for the first time since the divorce began, while I held my daughter's hand tightly, realizing that no matter what happened next, I had already taken back something far more important than money or property. I had taken back my voice. But what I didn't know yet was that the next hearing would force my husband to make a decision he never thought he'd have to make, a decision that would change the outcome of everything. On the day of the final hearing, I walked into the courtroom feeling strangely calm, not because I was confident about winning, but because I knew I had finally told the truth without fear, and whatever happened next would no longer define my worth. My husband sat across from me looking tired and tense, a completely different man from the one who once controlled every room he entered. And when the judge began reviewing the case, it became clear that the court had seen through the lies, the manipulation, and the carefully built image my husband had tried to protect. The judge spoke about responsibility, honesty, and the damage caused when power is misused, and then addressed the issue of custody first, stating clearly that my daughter's emotional and mental well-being mattered more than any argument or accusation. And hearing the words that she would stay with me felt like a heavy chain finally breaking off my chest, because that was the one thing I had been most afraid of losing. Then came the financial matters, and while the court acknowledged the hidden assets and dishonest behavior, it also stated that not every demand could be fulfilled, especially when years of manipulation had made the situation complicated. And in that moment, I understood something important. This fight was never just about money, it was about dignity. And when the judge announced that I would not receive the car, but would be granted ownership of a small house to secure a stable future for me and my daughter, I didn't feel disappointment. I felt relief, because that house meant safety, independence, and a place where no one could threaten us again. My husband tried to argue, his lawyer tried to reduce the decision, but the judge shut them down firmly, stating that consequences were unavoidable when trust was abused. And as the final words were spoken, I noticed my husband staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The same man who once made me feel small now looked powerless, and when the hearing ended and people started leaving, my class fellow quietly told me that justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it simply gives you enough to start over. Outside the courtroom, my husband approached me for the first time without anger or arrogance. He didn't apologize, but he said I had changed, and for the first time I realized he was right. I had changed, not because of pain alone, but because I had learned to stand up for myself and my child. And as I walked away holding my daughter's hand, she smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months, a smile that felt free. And later that evening, when we stepped into our small new house for the first time, it didn't feel small at all. It felt like peace. It felt like survival. And it felt like a reminder that even when people cheat you, betray you, and try to erase you, you can still rebuild from the ruins, not with everything you once had, but with everything you truly need. And that was the moment I understood the real victory wasn't the court decision or the property. It was the fact that my daughter would grow up seeing her mother choose strength over silence, and that was something no one could ever take away from us.